World War II was the most intense and brutal war in human history. Germany had tried to dominate over the world, but at the end they were defeated by the Allies. But why? How could the most powerful nation to ever exist not win such a war after defeating its greatest enemy and conquering Europe? To explain this, I designed a list of 4 points that will help us explain what caused the destruction of the German war machine. Starting off with Germany's biggest problem, oil. In the 1930s, following the Great Depression, Germany had built insane manufacturing industries, creating a secret industrialization ready for war. German industries were producing large quantities of panzers, submarines, and aircrafts, while expanding the military and increasing the percentage of working population in the industries. While Germany was able to expand their own military extensively, no matter how large their armed forces could get, they couldn't use them. In 1942, the Italian army under the command of General Erwin Rommel was stuck in the Battle of El Alamein. Not because the British were resisting so much, even though they were, but mainly for the lack of oil that was crucial to keep the tanks pushing forward. The Battle of El Alamein is just one of the many losses of the Axis, as a consequence of the absence of petroleum to keep going. After Germany invaded Poland, France and Britain declared war on Germany, ending all trades between the countries. On top of that, Britain had blockaded German trade routes through the sea, so Germany had to find other ways to get raw materials and petrol to keep the machine going. And that's when the Soviet Union steps in the scene. In August of 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that focused on opening trade routes between the two nations and partitioned Poland. Another main nation that was supplying the German Reich with oil was Romania. The Romanian oil fields covered the majority of the expenses of the German machine, but it was far from enough. Germany was spending too much oil that it actually had. And as time passed, they would have eventually run out of oil. One of the major reasons that Germany needed so much oil was obviously first the continuation of industrial production and the expenses of the occupied territories. By 1940, Germany had invaded Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries and France. You have to understand that these occupied territories had to be sustained, and for that, some of the oil that was going to Germany had to be redirected to these territories. And as the territory expanded, the more oil it was consumed, and time and imports were running out. So by the end of 1940, Germany had many options to get their precious oil. The first option was to defeat Britain and take the resources of their empire, but this option had failed as the Luftwaffe and the Kriegsmarine were not able to defeat the Royal Navy and the Air Force of Britain. Therefore, the invasion of Britain, as known as Operation Sea Lion, had failed. Another option was to get the oil from the Middle East. But at the time, not even the Allies were getting that much from it. And even if Germany had occupied those territories, the time and effort to transport the resources to Germany was too much costly, so this option was to be scrapped. At this point, which alternatives do you think Germany had to supply themselves with oil? If you said Venezuela, you are wrong. If you said the territories of the Soviet Union, you are correct. In particular, Germany had to focus on the region of the Caucasus, the richest area of the Soviet Union in terms of oil production. Invading the Soviet Union was the only option that Germany had to survive. On top of that, it was the main goal for the Reich anyway, as their main enemy were indeed the Bolsheviks. But declaring war on the Soviet Union would also mean losing the imports established in 1939 with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. But it didn't matter, it was the only available option. Invading the USSR was surely the best option for Germany, as not doing anything would have led to the ultimate defeat against the Allied powers. Look at the fronts Germany had when they invaded the USSR. You can clearly see how the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Oceans are not secured, and Britain is still fighting relentlessly to control the weather next door to the Axis powers. On top of that, the North African campaign was not going so good for the Italians, so for Germany, establishing another major front would obviously mean that the fighting had to be shifted extensively, weakening the already existing fronts. Invading the USSR, however, didn't mean getting new resources up front. The Red Army fought the Wehrmacht so relentlessly that the swift victory against the Colossus of the Soviet Union turned out to be a terrible war of attrition, that on the long run would have slowly burned all the resources of the Reich. And obviously, Germany was not getting the resources it needed to continue fighting a war of this scale. German history is full of victories and battles, with generals in possession of incredible strategic minds that were crucial for Germany to rise. This of course was the same for the Third Reich. During World War II, the best military strategists were put to command to pursue campaigns for Germany, but even the best generals could make mistakes. When Germany was starting to lose the war, Hitler continued incessantly to accuse his generals to be the ones making the bad decisions. He wasn't totally wrong, but he wasn't even in the right. During the war, the top-ranking generals and state leaders had to discuss the best moves to make. This led to many disagreements and a list of bad decisions that contributed to the downfall of the German campaigns. The ego of the German high command prevented them to take responsibility for their mistakes, blaming it all on Hitler himself or other companions. This condition was very bad for Germany, as it prevented them to reorganize and learn from their previous mistakes. Another problem with the German high command was the poor estimates given to certain situations. The most relevant example was the size of the Soviet army. Hitler believed that the Soviet Union was just a big, weak union of nations united under the weak Jewish Marxist umbrella. As Hitler said, you only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. The German High Command estimated the Red Army to be composed of about 3 million soldiers, while in reality it had millions of soldiers behind the front lines, ready to be sent to the front in an hypothetical war with Germany. Another important factor was the constant stress. Maintaining a continental war constantly for years was really stressful for the High Command, but mostly for Hitler. Having to control this huge war made him age faster and become more and more psychotic and crazy. Having as leaders of the Reich crazy psychotic people made Germany really struggle. Yes, the High Command still managed to make some genius moves, but it was nowhere near the defeats they were receiving. Even when the war shifted against Germany, Hitler still believed it was possible that the Allies would split apart, as he believed that Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin had all self-centered nations, and that with time they will get in conflict with each other. This was of course wrong, as not everyone at the political party believed they were God, and the Allies never broke apart. Hitler's misjudgments of Allied relations only helped to worsen the outlook and estimates by the Reich to their enemies. One of the most problematic things for Germany was also the fact that their allies were absolutely not comparable to the power of their nation. Germany was fighting the Allied powers, but their allies were the Axis powers, with their main ally being Italy and Japan. But the Japanese Empire was fighting a war that was on the opposite side of the planet, so their main ally was still Italy. The whole war rotated around Germany, as they were the ones that were occupying Europe and having the most advanced and technological army. So the Reich was basically carrying the whole war, while every other Axis power was just a satellite for them. Let's see the role of the main German allies. Italy joined the German war with the Allies in 1940, despite the lack of logistics to maintain a war and the incompetency of the Italian generals. Mussolini wanted to bring back the glory of the ancient Roman Empire, so he pursued a series of failing campaigns in North Africa and Greece that had forced Germany to step in the scene to help them. Despite the failures, Italy was needed to maintain partial control on the Mediterranean Sea, and even though Italy was still weak, even on the seas, it was better than having no protection whatsoever. Overall, Italy was a very weak ally, and for Germany it was a big weight to carry for all of the war. Spain never joined World War II, but during the Spanish Civil War, Germany had spent an amount of $215 million that was never returned or retributed. Overall, Spain didn't have much influence on the war, but it surely wasn't a bad thing having a fellow fascist nation instead of a democratic or communist state. Japan was an overseas ally of Germany. Despite the cultural differences, Japan helped Germany mainly by distracting the United States to pursue mainly the war in the Pacific Ocean, rather than the one in the Atlantic. The Japanese Empire was the second most powerful Axis member after Germany. They had conquered in just 6 months the Allied colonies in the Pacific and were making chaos in China, where the most brutal battles of the war were set. The Japanese army was ruthless. Japanese soldiers were ready to fight at any moment, just to kill at least some of the enemy's troops, performing kamikaze attacks and faking surrender, all just for their supreme emperor. Overall, a positive ally for Germany. Another important nation is situated in the Balkans. Romania was the most important source of oil for the German Reich. Romania supplied Germany with all the petrol they could get and also helped during Operation Barbarossa. Without Romania, the German Reich wouldn't have made that progress. The first mistake of the Third Reich was at Dunkirk. In 1940, Germany invaded the Low Countries and encircled more than 300,000 Allied forces in northern France and Belgium. As the Wehrmacht was closing the Allies down, they slowed before reaching Dunkirk, in fear of a possible Allied counterattack. On top of that, the Chief of Command of the German Air Force, Hermann Göring, had ensured Hitler that the Luftwaffe was capable of preventing an attempt of evacuation. This turned out to be wrong, as the British Navy, alongside fishermen with their small boats, risked their lives to save the young French and British soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk. This successful operation was so incredible that it was addressed as the Miracle of Dunkirk. After the defeat of France, Germany was left to face their last enemy, Britain. Hitler had proposed to Britain to sign a truce and stop the war in 1940. But as Churchill gave a fiery speech, Britain refused to surrender to Germany, beginning the Battle of Britain. Hitler's plan to invade the British Isles, as known as Operation Sea Lion, was to gain air and naval superiority over the English Channel and land on the southern coast of England. But the German air and naval forces were not able to defeat the mighty British fleet and air force that successfully defended the British Isles from the terrorizing force of the German Empire. This mistake wasn't done by Germany, but from its Italian ally. In 1940, Mussolini decided to attack Greece, without informing Hitler first. So as the campaign began to shift in favor of Greece, Germany had to come south through the Balkans to defeat them. The operation costed the German Reich money and time, as it was programmed to invade the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941. The Balkan campaign had delayed the invasion of the USSR and had distracted the preparation for it. The invasion of the Soviet Union brought to the German Reich also a series of incredibly stupid decisions. For starters, the German High Command had decided to focus on taking the three main Soviet cities of Leningrad, Moscow and Stalingrad. Instead, Hitler's plan was to focus on the south, where most Soviet resources were situated. This plan was ignored, and the German army was ordered to capture the three cities. This move was for the most part pretty pointless, as capturing Leningrad and Moscow would have had no particular military advantage, while going to Stalingrad and the Caucasus would have made Germany gain the precious resources of Ukraine and the precious oil that the Reich needed. After Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States had declared war against the Japanese Empire. Hitler, upon seeing the United States go to war against their allies, decided alongside Italy to declare war on the United States. The problem was that there was literally no need to do this. Germany could have let it go as not to provoke the United States. The United States would have surely intervened in Europe, but the declaration of war just accelerated their entry on the European scene. By 1941, Germany had to face the three most powerful countries in the world, almost all by themselves. In the winter of 1941, the Wehrmacht was freezing in the Soviet Union. Tanks were stuck in the mud, while horses and soldiers were freezing to death. During this time, the Red Army had made great progress against the Germans, as the Siberian soldiers arrived in Eastern Europe. The mistake Germany made here was that they underestimated the Red Army, thinking that they would have won by September. So they were far from prepared for the Soviet winter. This military catastrophe was overall the main cause for the loss of the German Reich. At this point, we have seen all main causes as to why Germany lost World War II. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth analysis. Subscribe if you enjoyed and I'll see you later.